on the same day, VS Code launched GA of agent mode. There was a huge amount of press, and it was like, oh, you can install agent mode in Copilot, like in VS Code, and here's something fun you can do with it. You can load up MCP servers like GitHub's MCP, which happens to be released exactly today. And fun part of this, the agent mode was actually meant to be released originally the day before. So it was serendipity that we landed at exactly the same time.
Welcome to MCP MVP. I am your host, Rachel Lee Neighbors, and today's MCP MVP is Sam Morrow, who joins us from GitHub. Sam is a professional drummer and the man behind the infamous GitHub MCP server. Welcome to MCP MVP, Sam. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel Lee. I'm very excited to get stuck in with you.
So recently, Pulse MCP, by the way, my favorite newsletter for all things MCP. Yeah, totally. It's like the best MCP news roundup out there. Pulse MCP recently covered GitHub MCP, and you just gave a talk at MCP Connect Day in Paris, where I also gave a talk. I was speaking about MCP apps, built an antisocial social agent, and you were speaking about GitHub MCP. I'm curious, before we start talking about what went good, what could have gone better, I want to know what inspired you to build an MCP server for GitHub?
This was actually quite a fun story, and kind of was one of my first, one of my favorite working relationships I formed at GitHub kind of magically, which was, we have a product manager, Toby Padilla, who, He was in the Gophers channel. He was a co-founder of Charm, like the thing that makes CLI tools in Go look really cool. Anyway, he was just posted one day, like, is anyone interested in making an MCP server in the Gophers channel? And me and a friend, William, and a guy, Javier, kind of like just kind of bit the thread, and we're like, this seems curious. Like, let's give it a go. And like I should add, like none of the three of us that agreed to kind of build it was working on this. So it started as a side project, and yeah, we just had fun, really. You know, like for a lot of us, it was kind of, we were suddenly had more access to kind of agentic tools internally, and we'd been using Copilot and things for years, but the idea of kind of trying to help extend agents felt pretty awesome. So I met William along the canals of Amsterdam to go and chat about like what we were going to do and how we'd approach this. And Javier even vibe coded a sort of first couple of tools, and we started using this unofficial MCP Go SDK. Yeah, we actually started building pretty fast. And around the same time, there was what they called a mobility march internally, where you could join one of the Copilot teams, and they were working on a Copilot coding agent, which hadn't launched yet. One of the teams was called Agent Services, and I looked at it and I was like, you know what? I really like the sound of this, and like the idea of an agent that you could just kind of assign GitHub issues to, and it would just work on them on the cloud autonomously and submit a PR felt like the most GitHub native kind of agent I could imagine. So I thought, you know what? I'll apply to this. So I did. And also I mentioned to our VP April, who was running that I was also trying to build the MCP server, and it felt like there was strong alignment. Anyway, I was excited. I was super excited, and I was still a few weeks away from this team. And then stuff spiraled, and we were building more and more, and I was fielding all sorts of questions. Like internally, there was a lot of excitement about MCP, and we got permission to bring it to open source. So our OSPO team was liaising and making sure that, we had all of our license stuff up to scratch, all the kind of stuff you need to do before you ship something. Then I think the Friday before I joined the team, which wasn't meant to be working on MCP really, that was the day we launched the open source repo. And on the same day, VS Code launched GA of agent mode. there was a huge amount of press, and it was like, oh, you can install agent mode in Copilot in VS Code, and here's something fun you can do with it. You can load up MCP servers like GitHub's MCP, which happens to be released exactly today. And a fun part of this, the agent mode was actually meant to be released originally the day before. So it was serendipity that we landed at exactly the same time. And yeah, then from there, we had, well, firstly, our CEO at the time posted, and then, Satya at Microsoft reposted, his kind of stuff. And I was like, oh man, I didn't really expect that it would start going up this far. But yeah, Thomas, our CEO, was kind of, anyway, like right on top of it that day, because obviously like Agentic AI is still exciting people, and we're now roughly a year on from when this all started. And yeah, then it was the most starred repo on GitHub the week after it launched, open source, and we got loads of contributions. And yeah, like one of my favorite things, like I say, I mentioned earlier that my relationship with Toby was really fun. Like he was encouraging just pure exploration. So I started building, some of the more interesting parts of the spec, like playing with the ability to dynamically change tools and, adding the annotation support and, just if there was some part of the spec that could be messed with to see how it would work, like resource templates, like barely anyone's ever used them, I think.
I know.
Like technically, since pretty much it started, before they even had the completions, and I wasn't quite sure how the templates were meant to be filled out by anyone or agent, I had added them, and you could access any file on GitHub that you had access to as a resource. So, I mean, they're still there, and we have completions now. There's a million interesting tangents here, because it was really, like, it's hard to describe how intensely how fast everything was moving, and like also
it sounds like the whole org was hyped about it.
Yeah, yeah, and more, because even like GitHub is run pretty much fully independently from Microsoft, and VS Code team is in Microsoft side. So for me, there is internal collaboration, but for me that was the first time I was collaborating nearly daily, because you had, like, for example, one of their product managers, Harold, who, if you find him, posts some really amazing videos on LinkedIn and stuff all the time, and does really cool talks.
Harold, what's his name?
Kirshner? Yeah, and also Connor Pete, who's, I can't remember if he's principal or distinguished, but he's a very, very senior engineering title, and he's a really awesome person to work with. Like, I worked with him loads, and, experimenting with completions for the templates was one of those areas, and like the SDK we were using didn't support it, so I made an implementation on a fork of the SDK so I could play with it with VS Code. Then we tried it, and it was like, well, I just messaged him like, hold on, I've been trying to implement this, but you don't send any of the arguments I've completed back to me, and I'm trying to fill out a file path and like own a repo and stuff, how am I meant to do this without the dependent arguments? Because like the server has no state, it can't keep track of this, especially not on a remote server. And yeah, anyway, we ended up, Connor immediately submitted a kind of fix, and I reviewed it a bit. There was a little bit of discussion, and it got merged into the spec pretty fast, because it was an obvious mistake, but like we were still in this area where, like even changes to the spec like that were kind of moving very fast, and the dust hadn't really settled at this point. So yeah, it was
I think things move a little slower on the MCP spec today, but when was this exactly? Was this November of 2024?
So November it kind of kicked off, but for me it was really it wasn't really till about February that I
February
got
2025
stuck in myself. Yeah, so the hype had already kind of started building, but like GitHub had its own kind of skills thing, and agent extensibility was already a thing. But like a lot of people, I think judging from like how the A2A protocol kind of came out hot on the heels of MCP and things as well, and kind of referenced MCP, I think Anthropic's launch of that kind of sped up a few conversations.
It certainly did. It reminds me of how like JavaScript was made in, just a couple of days. And we are still patching it to this day with things like TypeScript. But if we waited forever to make something perfect, we would never launch anything. And I can say, as a person who's working with imperfect technologies every day, that we can always adjust or adjust, patch, and even recommission specs as necessary. Now, I'm curious. After you launched it, there was a lot of hype. There was a lot of buildup to push out GitHub MCP. You put it into the wild, and things didn't exactly proceed as planned. What jump scares awaited?
Indeed. So, one of the things two things kind of happened at the same time. The first is we've got a lot of platform, and we wanted to try and cover a decent amount of it with MCP so that your agent could use all of GitHub. But at the same time, and obviously much more so even a year ago, agent context windows do not come for free, and the fixed token cost of an MCP server that's got, say, 100 or so tools, which we managed to exceed. I think at the time, a lot of models would struggle with even 20 tools. And certainly by the time you've got kind of like GitHub levels of tools,
how many tools did it ship with?
I can't remember the total top number. I think we may have technically something like 108 if you enable everything.
In this day, people tended to just like put them all in. All of the tools.
While I was adding loads of tools, I was kind of conscious that like it was hard to really, grok what one user would want to use and another would want to use.
Exactly. We all have our different ways of working with GitHub. There's no one established pattern.
No, precisely. And so, I kind of worked with Toby on like an idea of, what became known as toolsets, where, we tried to roughly relate different tools to different products, I guess, roughly, like issues, repos. They were kind of areas, and let people configure them. All you need to do is add a tiny bit of JSON configuration, and suddenly you've got way less tools, and they're kind of hopefully roughly the ones you want. And then I went further and built also experimented with a dynamic version of it where the agent could enable the different sets of tools. So you could start with basically none except for the selection tools, and then kind of progress. None of those things were shipped on by default, and users didn't by and large discover them. They just loaded everything and got upset that their agent windows the context windows were being blown out. And I mean, we had some criticism as well of creating too many atomic tools and mapping too closely to kind of REST APIs as well. And I kind of agree. The only challenge I've had is that to implement that truly on a platform like GitHub normally means actually having to kind of limit substantially what's possible. So, an example is like we now have projects tools. They have a lot of different values, a lot of customizable things, and they also, like regular issues, have fields of like what project they're in and things like that as well. And none of that is useful unless you use GitHub projects for your project tracking. And we get used by people who use Jira, and then actually they don't even want issues. They just do the code management part. There are ways to build great opinionated workflows, and I would commend anyone who has the kind of engineering know-how to fork GitHub's MCP and kind of push it hard down their workflow. And I have seen some cases of that. Like recently I saw somebody had created a project MCP that's like it recommends you set up the regular GitHub MCP, and then this just adds a bit like kind of batch project functionality on top.
So basically, like, makes micro agents out of GitHub's granular MCP tools. So you kind of call an agent that has access to a set of tools to perform an action.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the idea, and I haven't dug into the implementation, but it kind of shows you, like, if you're working in a more opinionated area, then you can kind of specialize and spend more context on the parts that matter and less on the ones that don't. And, you know, like the average GitHub user doesn't necessarily want bulk projects actions, but if you're someone who's like running big projects and you want to add 50 issues to a project, then you do. And yeah.
This is something I remember from working on the React team. Oftentimes developers want best practices and cow paths more than they want, a set of granular tools that they can customize. But at that time, at the start of MCP, I wasn't really clear exactly how people were going to use these tools or what they would expect. And the first thing you want to do is make sure that there's parity so that an agent could do anything that a user could do. And then the person building their own agent would enable and create this sort of structure on how they expected their agent to use these different tools. We didn't quite realize at that time that adding tools to agents would become something like adding plugins to your browser. You know, you just be like, this one, this one, this one, this one. Why is my browser so slow?
You worked for Firefox at one point, right? Like, or at least at Mozilla. I mean, like, anyone who lived through that and was an avid Firefox user eventually got to kind of terminal plugin state. It was like the heat death of your Firefox instance.
Customizability is a blessing and a curse, but also, you know, I think it's a testament to like not knowing where the audience would be at that time, who was the ideal end user, and what would their proficiency and desire be. You know, if they like to have like I put together a Blue Sky agent and learned very quickly that agents are not clever enough to be able to perform like intersect operations when given tools for like getting all of the followers from different groups. I would be like, all right, do a mass unfollow of anyone who follows an account I don't like. And couldn't figure it out. I had to build custom tools. I had to, create a bulk unfollow tool where it would take, different parameters so that the agent could be like, oh, my user is asking me to do a bulk unfollow. And rather than having to, slip into code mode and spin up a Python script and essentially just use tools as API calls, it could just call that tool as God intended. And at first, I don't think we had that pattern baked. Is it true that you mentioned that GitHub MCP has now adopted a slightly different approach to tools? What's changed?
Well, so I was kind of waxing lyrical, even like pretty early on, that like the distinction between APIs and MCP and CLIs as well was like, well, in terms of tool descriptions and things, was that you were trying to capture intent and that like one-to-one mapping with APIs was a poor goal. So
right.
So even in the early days, like we had a whole bunch of tools that did call more than one API to try and achieve like the intent slightly more. It was,
but then you've just increased the number of tools.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's a real trade-off, because then it's like once you're like, if you're just giving the tools to the model, it's true today that kind of intent-based and workflow-based and stuff that natural language models kind of excel at quite naturally does work better.
Yeah.
But if you're going today. Well, yeah, but then even today at the same time, like if you're looking at code mode, or Anthropic released their programmatic tool calling API, which was like the kind of model side version of that. The answer is also maybe not. And maybe
then it wants CRUD operations wrapped in an auth and tool wrapper.
Yeah, and discovery of them kind of like as needed without I mean, they also released their tool search tool. So now if you enable that API with Anthropic's models, then they have some clever ways of saving some of the cache cost of changing all the tools that are available, while also like dynamically enabling them on the fly and even letting you implement the search yourself if you want, but they also provide one if you don't. Like the and I feel pulled in different directions because I do imagine that we're looking at like part of the future we're looking at is kind of like bash type composability, like a terminal, Unixy, you can pipe to SSH to like into like gzip or something. You can do all these beautiful compositions and you can awk and grep and like most of those tools are only a little powerful on their own, but like the whole reason that developers never moved away from CLIs, or at least never entirely, was because like the amount of code you would need to write to replace like the really elegant kind of dense lines of bash is kind of huge. And I can imagine the tools like on one future direction, like tools being composed like that, but with agentic kind of identity considerations factored in, and like the ability to invoke human in the loop appropriately. And I personally haven't really seen as much innovation in the space of governance and safety and running in environments where there is no terminal as well. Like MCP occupies niches that I've been kind of shouting about the existence of, but I think like your average kind of vibe coder who's reading the exciting blogs about all the coolest stuff is just not really being confronted by like the same constraints as like enterprise users, which actually I think are a substantial portion of MCP users. And now, ChatGPT is kind of going hard on consumer apps. And it's like the consumer apps don't have terminal access, and they don't have, and they really are trying to present visually what was previous to now being presented as like JSON RPC calls that you could inspect if you want. But it's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is. I find it a bit intimidating to think about maintaining and running an MCP server that other people use. It's kind of like owning an API interface. Can you retire tools without causing someone to freak out and miss them and request them back? How do you do versioning? I have so many questions about what goes into maintaining such a substantial server. And what's it like maintaining GitHub's MCP server versus, GitHub's API?
So one thing that I tried to push quite hard is that we don't know exactly where this is going, and we're not ready to hard commit. So very early on, I was like, the surface of this is going to change, and we're not going to do on the remote server, like static versioning. We've gradually, as like there's kind of integrator layers, including some internal ones, but also external ones where they want a more stable surface, or at least want to be able to do an atomic cutover of new functionality that's done at a timing chosen by them and not us. So, pardon me, we are moving in that direction. But the one of the most like novel parts of this is that in almost all agent scenarios currently, the model doesn't have persistent memory, and you give it the new tools and it just works out how to use them. And like I've been trying to use this as an opportunity to rapidly iterate. My team has, do experiments, change the surfaces, see, like we consolidated a whole bunch of tools to see if that would work okay. And now like kind of we have some read and write CRUD tools that encompass what would have been like 4 to 8 different tools into 2. And especially more recent models are better.
And you can trust the agent to pick its own tools. This is one of the things I've heard, which is why, like MCP servers are going to be better and more robust than API surface areas, because agents can choose tools that are right for them. and accomplish the same task, instead of, oh no, the name of this endpoint changed. You should be using this other one. Naughty engineer kind of scolding. I call it command line scolding.
Yeah, there's a lot of command line scolding.
As a person who is prone to errors and forgets things, I am never fond of being scolded by my tools. Even though I am often a person who is scolding others, I personally do not enjoy it. I think most people don't. And one of the nice things about agents is they're fairly self-healing, ostensibly. And are you saying that as you've shifted the API, you've shifted the space and the surface area of the tools, have agents adapted well to that?
Yeah, so the only problem that anyone's ever reported to us with a change in kind of tool surface has been where someone's either integrated or perhaps an end user's hard-coded tool names, and like there's very little we can do about that. We now have the ability to specify individual tools via configuration instead of like local configuration. And my colleague Tommaso is the one who kind of spearheaded that, and like it was a pet project because I think like personally he wanted to use it, but it also means that because we know what tools you were intending to limit to, we can then, if we like say we consolidate it in another tool, we have a way of providing you with the tool that you probably meant, because, you know, rather than just error and say, well, technically, you know, like it's kind of not very helpful to just be like, well, technically you provided a tool that doesn't exist anymore, when it was like they had no way of knowing when we would change it or how we've changed it. So we've tried to be sensitive to that. I think that's allowed for a slightly less brittle individual tool configuration, but the tool sets also, like, I think a part that I hope people kind of appreciated about the design was that you knew you wanted to work with GitHub issues, but you don't need to be prescriptive about which tools. And like we have a read-only filter as well, so you can kind of, if you want like the intersection of read-only tools and issues tools, read-only mode plus issues toolset will give you that, you know, like it. And if we change the tool surface of issues tools, you'll still have them and they'll still only be read-only. So like compared to individual tool configuration, I think it's a lot less brittle. So that was kind of why we leaned into grouping semantics.
It sounds like one of the pro tips for people who are building agents to work with servers here is, as I put it, if you're micromanaging, something's wrong. You should let the agent discover and use the tools as it can, so you get that benefit. Otherwise, you may as well be building a very proscripted workflow and working with APIs. What are you really using the agent for there? I'm wondering, for people who are building MCP servers at large companies today, what are your pro tips for them? What are the things that you wish you could beam into their minds from your own experiences with GitHub's MCP server?
One of the big ones is like you kind of hit the nail on the head with like the way CLI tools kind of tell you off, and it's subtle. So like I'll start with a counterexample and then show you kind of how. So for example, if you like something agents frequently do is because I use 1Password and the SSH agent to sign my commits and also SSH, and I need to use biometrics or type in my full password to allow that to happen. And while that's happening, sometimes agents get bored and then try to turn off commit signing and various things. I mean, there's other problems, like they're acting fully as me and signing as me. So I do like to also be privy to what they're doing. But like the interesting thing is they see the failure and they're kind of so trained to keep trying that they kind of get derailed off the nice and kind of everything how you wanted it version and start trying to like attack the problem of, oh, well, I can't sign commit, so how can I turn, you know, like the way it's done and the way they get told off by the terminal tools, I think also kind of encourages like trying to solve the specific error, even if like that's not the right thing to solve is, as far as my intent anyway, is the person who was running the agent. So bringing this to advice, you have a huge capacity to do better errors for agents that don't just say like, oh, I failed to sign your commits, but be like, you know, I tried to commit, but I couldn't because the user is not authorized or something. You know, please tell the user to authorize the thing. Like however it interacts with your system, you give a plain text error to a model that reads it and acts accordingly, and they really take the steering. So, like, if we're going to do a kind of flowchart of the advice, you start with the trying to do the thing, and then if it didn't quite work, but the original intent is obvious, like you're trying to push to a repo, but it hasn't been initialized yet, but probably the agent also created the repo in the first place and just didn't initialize it, then like it makes sense to kind of try and plow on, like making some assumptions, like they push to the main branch, but this one calls it like trunk or master or something. So, you know, like at times we'll even like go and get the actual default ref for them, and then we'll tell them what we've done, but like, you know, in the response, so it's not completely opaque, but usually
so you have the MCP server kind of narrating what's happening for the agent in its response.
Yeah, and making it more successful at the same time, like in single tool calls. And then, yeah, like if there was something we couldn't do quite right, or we have to terminally fail, then like now is kind of the time to let the agent understand like what happened and either how to get unblocked or just to accept that it is blocked on this and then like move on.
So rather than writing your server's kind of fail conversation as very, you know, CLI, you know, it's failed, you can't sign in. Actually think about like how you would write this for if a human were doing it, because they are LLMs. They understand human language. They are more human than robot in their understanding of things that we send them. And so you could just be like, hey, couldn't log in. You might want to ask your user to SSH in. They may have a way to authenticate for you. So check that out. Maybe there's a tool somewhere. And that's a much more helpful response for an agent to deal with than just, couldn't log in. You can't perform that action, Steve. I'm sorry. Which is very unhelpful for them and might encourage them to start getting a little creative in their things. You want to prompt them to engage with their human. You know, go talk to your mommy to see if you can make this purchase over the phone, sort of thing. That's really good feedback. What else have you got that people should know when they're working on a gigantic server for their company?
I think also if you do control the agent you're using, and you can also couple it to things that are going to be useful. If it's like an internal in a business or something and everyone's using a specific tool that's sanctioned, like as an example, like Copilot CLI takes large tool responses and puts them in a temp file, and then the agent can kind of grep them and things. So instead of just blowing out all your context, you can actually successfully resolve like needle in a haystack kind of problems by, you know, sure, there's an entire megabyte or more of output stuffed into a temp file, but then like the MCP server doesn't know what kind of granule it is looking for. And so, you know, like the model might actually only need one line from this to do what it needed to do, but the answering the question of which line is hard. So like the sort of, oh, well, MCP servers shouldn't return large tool responses, again, is like, you know, all these assumptions and all these best practices that kind of come and go are like questioned every day depending on the execution context. So like, you know, I would check out the advanced features of the agents you're actually using and see if they like, see if you can, like, if it influences the design of your server. Because as far as I'm concerned, like using Copilot CLI quite a lot because I work for GitHub.
Makes sense.
To be fair, they're also iterating really fast and they keep adding really cool things. So like, I'm also really enjoying it. Like
stack traces can be huge. And if you're using MCP to debug something, like you have a QA pipeline, you probably need to anticipate that you're going to have to place those stack traces somewhere and allow them to be examined further by the LLM.
I mean, like a classic example is actually warning output, say from like a statically compiled language, like, some huge kind of monstrosity of a C++ project probably spits out like thousands of lines of warning during the build, and then like it's almost all noise. But like either you have to add something, like you can add like task or something, some field that gives the intent, and then you could either try and use the agents model with sampling, or maybe you have some other means of like getting inference or statically kind of analyzing it, and then try to marry that up with what the model was looking for. But
you could even add breadcrumbs, agentic breadcrumbs, to sort of help the agent sniff out where it needs to be looking. There's always that one line in the stack trace that actually is the problem. And it'd be great to, when I'm doing this, I usually will use a marker like to do. Everything I write, I can just Command F to do. And if I find the to do, it's not ready. But maybe that would be something similar, but for an LLM, like could name it smell or something like that, just to help it look and see where it should start the search rather than having to hork down the entire file and blow its context and return to stupid mode.
Yeah, and like I mean, there's a lot of innovation going on in that space, but it's kind of like, for me, it feels like there's a lot of these existential questions where I keep hearing the answers are clear, and I'm like, I'm in the middle of this. I run a fairly popular server, like probably at times like the most popular one of remote servers, and I do not feel that these questions are answered. I feel like the answers are evolving, and sometimes we make decisions that are wrong in the moment, especially for a given agent that does struggle with these things. But then, at the same time, if you're using another agent, you might have a completely different experience, and that has been my experience. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of potentially interesting advice. It's kind of, it depends what problems they have to solve. Like, another one is like, actually use annotations. It is good for your agentic system to know when something destructive is going to happen. It's good to know that something's going to be written or not. And things like the open world hint, it's good to know that the response coming back is like coming from like pastebin or something, and like, who knows.
For the audience who may not be familiar with what annotations are, can you explain them?
Yeah, so annotations, because they kind of didn't want to like implicitly say that they're trusted, they're called hints. And when you define, say, like a tool that creates a repository, that would be read-only hint false. And these, they just provide a little bit of additional metadata to tool calls that then, so like, for example, if I run something in VS Code or Copilot or CLI, like it'll pop up a little box if I start trying to do write actions or destructive actions.
Yeah, CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete. And lets them kind of realize, if I do this, I might delete something. I should let the human know.
Yeah, exactly. And also an important part of this, like, I think, like, well, another thing, if you're building on this kind of tech, is to actually get a realistic and like mental model for what an agent is. And it's like the model, the inference providing thing is not the agent. Like, the software you're running isn't the agent. Like, the MCP is definitely not the agent. You actually are just running stuff on a loop, and the model provides
the system,
like that thing of what to do. It's capable of providing like cooling tools and things like that, but then there's this opportunity inside that loop, like with any loops, like computer games and like GUI applications all have a similar kind of execution pattern, but like is oh, like the model wants to call this tool, and this tool has this hint. So now, like, the part of the agent loop that's responsible for prompting or not the user, for example, based on hints, then triggers a bit of UI, and then the user clicks, it handles the click, and then it sends the call to the MCP server. Or in the case of open world hint, which is about, like the dangerous data coming back from the public and getting you prompt injected or something, like actually, like then it sends the call straight to the MCP server, but then it often asks you, do you want to shove this piece of information, probably just randomly off the internet, into your agent context or not, if you have the confirmation on. And it's like, there's all these beats in the agent loop that are actually like nothing to do with models, but are really important in terms of protecting you.
It's true. This is something that I think everyone, even people who are building agents today, should familiarize themselves with, is how the agent loop works. The LLM is just deciding. It's not actually calling the tools. It's telling its harness, like the response comes back, it's packaged with a selection of tools, and the LLM gets the response in a set of tools, and it's like, what do you want to do now? And the LLM decides, continue chatting, we're good, call a tool. And then it sends that response back to the harness, and the harness is the thing that executes and sends off the response. There's so many little vectors there where the human can interfere with that loop, but also that can be targeted by malicious actors. What was it? The deadly trifecta.
Trifecta, yeah.
The lethal trifecta of executable, external, and access. And when they all get together, it's important to it is really important to understand how exactly an agent runs. We use the word agent a lot, but it describes the system of LLM, looping, and tool calling.
Yeah, and like I think, like other things that are taken for granted previously, like people keep having these epiphanies and trying crazy ideas, but was that like the output of the turn goes back into the model until the model can't cope anymore, and then there's some kind of compaction step, and then you try again. But like for the Simpsons,
when the context gets too full.
Yeah, exactly. And like, and also the agent gets slower and worse in some ways as it ekes to the edge of that window as well. But like, as an interesting alternative, you've got things like, like Simpsons fans will appreciate Ralph Wiggum mode, where instead of like accruing more and more awareness of everything that's been done in its session, it's like actually the loop just forgets everything each time around.
It's like running with amnesia. It's like Groundhog's Day. Every morning it wakes up, it checks its MD file, and it's like, oh, I have to do this thing. Does something, makes a note, falls asleep, wakes up, executes again.
Yeah, and it may have updated, it should have updated its MD file with some kind of semblance of where it is on this spec. Like, it's not entirely memoryless, but it's not.
But it also trusts the inherent intelligence of the agent to figure out a good next step when it spawns in. Hilariously, when I had COVID, I had terrible short-term memory for about 6 months after. It was awful. But I set up something very similar for myself using files so that every morning I would wake up and I'd have a summary of the previous day's meetings, the tasks I needed to complete, etc. And I would just check in and update this file throughout the day. And that is how I managed to survive and keep my job despite having no short-term memory after COVID. It did come back eventually, but I had to fake it so hard. So when I look at something like Ralph Wiggum, I'm like, yeah, that totally would work. You can, as long as you're noting the right stuff down, this can execute. But interesting things like that. I think we can learn a lot by comparing some of the challenges that humans have in their day-to-day with how agents operate. Thinking like an agent I actually enjoy it a lot. It's kind of like thinking like a fish to catch a fish. You got to think, if I were a fish, where would I be? It's like if I were an agent and I spawned in and I looked at this site and I saw the LLMs.txt, what would my next step be? It'd be like, well, I follow this link. That link went to HTML. Oh shit, there goes my context. Okay. And doing this has really helped me in building things that agents can use in the wild.
Yeah, I think that's a really, it's a thing that some people just kind of had to do for their own struggles. for sure. And like I am definitely in that camp where, things like the fallibility of forgetting to do things was something I didn't want to kind of own. And so like a good example is like I used to use Google Inbox before they canceled it because it kind of munged notes with like to-dos with emails that you could snooze. And I was like, I'm either going to deal with this now or I'm going to work out when I think I might be able to deal with it and snooze it. And the same with like every time someone asks me to do something that I'm actually like said yes to or whatever, or I need to remember to do, it all goes in the to-dos. And I take absolutely zero responsibility for remembering any of these things. And I know people that feel like it kind of almost subtracts from their humanity that, like like if I'm like, oh, just like put a note in there. No, it's fine. I'll remember. And I'm sat there with my weird kind of developer brain being like, no, you should build your validation into the system. Like you can't fail. It's great. And they're like, no. I want to like show that I can remember things. And it's easier to work with agents if you're on the sort of like you were building tools to try and help you function as a human in the first place. Because you say, it's very similar.
It's true. I'm not saying that agents are humans, but they do have a large chunk of humanity's way of expressing itself baked into at the LLM layer. And so that means that it has a very human way of communicating, and it makes decisions that can appear very human-like. And that's actually very useful, because previously, to think about building systems for programming, you almost had to think a little differently from a human. You had to, really train yourself in logic, gates, etc. And there's nothing wrong with that. But now you can use human language, but it also means you can sort of think like if I were, if a little kid were trying to do this and they were told you don't have the authority to do it, what would their next steps be? Probably try to sneak in the back door because you told them to go do something and they really believe in you and they're gonna, So it's definitely a different way of thinking that some people may not be used to, especially in the engineering field. But I think for other folks, especially if they have had some experience dealing with the challenges of cognition, kids, narcoleptics, anything like that, I think that you can bring some interesting learnings to the community from that. We are at the end of our time here, but I wanted to wrap up, make sure that we had the chance to cover. You've been active on MCP standards. There's been this incredible back and forth between the community and the people who build the standards. And I think that's amazing. Would you recommend that people working on their own servers contribute and collaborate in the MCP standards Discord, etc.? Is this a valuable thing to do?
100%. I think like it's a very accessible and open organization, and all decisions and things are captured in kind of public on GitHub and things, and meetings are advertised publicly, and there's no restriction on attendance. The link's just dropped unauthenticated. You can just join for anything you're interested in. In Discord, there's kind of discussions happening, kind of async about, like, for example, I've been recently joining in the discussion about could MCP be a vector for delivering agentic skills? And another one, I'm about to propose a working group that's looking at improving annotations, which, like, I have a specification enhancement proposal that I co-authored with a colleague, Robert, from OpenAI, that's looking to kind of improve how, like, essentially improve the annotation system to make it make more, essentially improve the annotation system so that, like, for instance, they're interested with MCP apps and, like, is something reversible, is this going to actually, like, spill the glass of milk, or, like, can it be wiped up afterwards? Like, that's when they're bringing stuff to the consumer, there's not enough language or kind of structured metadata to enable the granularity of information that they want to know. Anyway, like, that stuff is just, it's all there. And if you post a comment, people will read it and they will respond to you. Even David, like DSP, one of the co-creators of MCP, you'll see him in the Discord all the time posting different things, and he responds directly sometimes to me as well, and he would to anyone. So yeah, I think it's really easy to join in, and like SDKs are included in this if they're official as well. So like another thing is, if you're building an MCP server, you're using an SDK, and if you have thoughts, questions, or problems with the way your SDK approaches something, it also could be applicable to multiple, right? And you can feed into the conversation for like how SDKs would assimilate new parts of the specification. And there's parts of the specification that came out last year, for example, that aren't assimilated fully by like every SDK, because it's kind of like, it's not clear exactly where you would put it. So like GitHub, for example, does the scope challenge thing where if you have an OAuth token and you don't have the scopes, then we can send a special 403 payload that tells the agent harness to tell the user to go and get the scopes. And then if they approve them, the tool call succeeds and everything's happy. But we had to build that in front of the SDK. These are the kinds of things where once you get into the weeds on like all of the features that are available, like you can have an impact because it's still being built now.
That's awesome. And also it's pretty cool. I remember you talking at MCP Connect Day about, what did you call it? It was about the scopes where you're like escalating permissions. The agent starts with minimal scopes, and as it requests more scope, you expand the authorization. And for instance, first it's just trying to read the PR, and you auth into GitHub, and then if it's actually trying to push a PR, you would have to auth in again to give it the right privileges as well.
Yeah, so like if your agent harness, for example, allows specifying kind of initial scopes, you could specify none and go for full principle of least privilege, and then as you call
principle
tools,
of least privilege,
you'll get hit. I mean, it's annoying in a way because of all the interactive confirmations, but it does mean that like if you're
does feel like Windows XP land of did you plug this USB in? Is it okay to open it? Is it safe?
Yeah, that's tough. And every security conversation I ever see kind of like, there's always like some folks who are like, right, but so how do we make this like secure and autonomous? And like, you're kind of like, aren't they at loggerheads? Like I really want to, like there's really interesting innovations. Like there's a cross agent auth, or it's called IDJAG in the actual like public specification. I think Okta's name is XAA, but where it's like, if you work for an enterprise, you could give an agent permission, including identities and kind of like scopes or whatever for like different services. And then as the agent kind of makes requests, it can just be given the tokens because it checks with the server, like, the like SSO kind of SAML or whatever server. And it's like, oh yeah, that's fine, continue. And, but like, anyway, like, I mean, we're constantly trying to work out ways that we can let autonomous agents function while still having kind of respected auth boundaries and limited.
And being able to call the human in the loop and on chord as appropriate. Sneak is doing some interesting stuff with that. I should see if I can get them to come join us too. I feel like this is the appropriate place to mention that if you go to arcade.dev, you can find an entire suite of GitHub tools on Arcade's MCP servers that do handle OAuth and elicitation pretty comprehensively across the board. So if you're waiting for those agents to catch up, there are options out there. And you don't have to keep walking people through putting all their API keys in a JSON file.
And I believe wasn't Nate from Arcade heavily involved in this elicitation specification too?
Absolutely. It is one of the ways in which Arcade has given back to the community. I want to see this. Want to see elicitation available across all agents everywhere. Before you leave, you have a special demo you wanted to share with the audience.
Yeah, so bear with me because there's going to be more JSON than I would like in a demo, but
Who
I
doesn't
kind
love
of
JSON?
I kind of want to just showcase some things that are possible. So this is VS Code, and when I click things, it spits out the config. So I'm currently authed into the default toolset of GitHub MCP. You can see I've got 40 tools. I can actually go as far as to see all the various versions of it I've got. So this is the GitHub remote one I was looking at. And yeah, anyway, it's a bunch. I'm not going to show calling them. That's kind of an exercise for the reader. But for example, on the remote server, we added a configuration by URL.
So you can configure in your MCP server JSON, you can configure the access to the different tools by URL, kind of like you would an API endpoint.
Yep.
Very nice. I see you shared some read-only tools. What have we got here?
So here I did the issues read-only.
Ah.
Now I've got get label issue read, which is one of those conjoined tools, list issue types, list issues, like it's very specific. And if I pull the read-only off the URL, then now I've got 9 tools because now I can create issues and things. But we tried to make it
full
composable,
scopes.
And I think I missed the X off that. I think I need to double check. But
what's the X stand for?
It was
experimental.
That was actually just a namespace for us in order to avoid collisions with kind of like possibly additional MCP servers or all sorts. Like one such is, I apologize, this keeps coming up. I can't stop it when I restart the server. And I think there's also some caching. So sometimes it's hard to demo just like constantly changing the config because it can impact things. So insiders is somewhere like, I know soon we're going to drop some MCP kind of UI tools for fun there. And the PRs are already in the open source repo. It's one of the fun things of working in the open. Like, people can see experiments, but stuff that we're not going to ship to end users without validation can go there first. Then if it breaks you or you don't like what we've done, you can tell us, and you can also just move off the insiders URL and have the functionality go away again. So we figured that was a nice way to kind of let people in the community and integrators and stuff like get a flavor for what's coming. And I mean, like, for instance, I use VS Code's insiders mode all the time. And when I was working on MCP, it was great because like new spec features would kind of drop, and then I'd be able to use them on sometimes a near daily basis. And like for people who have that kind of comfort where it's kind of, I mean, if an MCP tool call like goes weird or fails, then I'll just change the URL. It's like it's a low effort to join the experiment. So like I'm excited to see what things we try there, because like the hope is we can ship even faster, and ship to end users faster, because we have feature flags on the remote server. So like it's possible for us to onboard cohorts, onboard GitHub staff, like give a percentage of people access. But I like reversing the intent a little bit, where it's like you can elect to have some of this stuff rather than just be experimented on.
I agree. So people can go ahead and get GitHub Remote on the Insiders track. How do they give you feedback as they're working with it? Where do they find you?
So just github.com/GitHub MCP server. I mean, I can very quickly open. You can hit the issues tab, or if it's a kind of broader thing, we've got a whole bunch of discussions. And generally, if it's a big feature, like I'm sure we'll have a discussion for UI support when we do it, because we're really curious to see what people are gonna get from that. I realize like about 5 minutes into doing this that I just changed my browser tab and I'm sharing the other screen, so apologies for that.
No worries.
I did bring up our website and open those tabs. Yeah, like
we'll include a link in the show notes.
Beautiful. And I think I sort of mentioned, we also support the headers for the tool sets, and like a fun feature, I mentioned the scope challenge, but we have the kind of reverse as well, where this is a GitHub pat token with no scopes, so it can innately access read-only like repository information and things. So it gets 20 tools from the default set. And if I go to a much more privileged token and I turn it on, it should have, so it's got twice as many because there's a whole bunch of write tools, and that's granular. So if it misses one scope that doesn't allow, say, gists, then you just will lose the gists tools. It's that kind of thing. So we wanted to make configuration by less painful, where one, exactly what tools are going to work because they're what you get, and conversely, you're also not going to get tools that will never work. And we did the same for actions tokens as well, where they actually have no user identity because it's a server-to-server token. So we've removed the user tools from them because, for the same reason. So that's probably enough of the remote. I don't know if this is going to work, but I can at least get it to run. I haven't run this in a little while because we decided that basically instead of so this was a never released actually, but this was a RAG version of dynamic tool selection where, we tried out what if the agent could enable tools. If you start that version, you get enable toolsets, get me and search toolsets. So if you want it to do something on GitHub, it has to search toolsets, and then based on a semantic search result, it will then call the enable. And I mean, I think I don't have any other, I do. It's very important that I say okay, otherwise the wrong server. I think I could try it. Like I say, it might not work because I think I don't think I added an OpenAI key, and it needs inference in order to build the embeddings. But let's give it a try. Let's see what happens, because maybe I actually committed the embeddings database, so it might just work. So I don't know.
Let's find out.
Can you open an issue talking about crabs and other crustaceans in the most recent repository I created in my account? So it's probably got a bunch of things it would have to do to answer this. So let's kind of have a quick look and see what it ends up doing. Yep. So it realized it needs repos and issues tools. So I can allow some of these in the session.
I love this little allow dialogue.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying that actually, because I kind of this is hopefully going to work on a public repo of mine, and also the tokens not SSO'd into GitHub. So I'm not really as worried here as I would be if it, was one that had full access to all my accounts.
Is this UI VS Codes, or is this provided by the server?
Yeah. See, because the thing is, I would have needed embeddings for the anyway. It enabled some of them. Yeah, I would need embeddings for generated for the search query, but I can show you it takes a task, and so now it was going to search for listing repositories for a user and create an issue. And then it was going to get a set of search results that were kind of ranked by semantic similarity, and then it was going to enable them and continue. But it ends up doing stuff like this. It's kind of a half demo, I should have realized. But yeah, we decided this wasn't really the right approach for individual MCP servers kind of providing their own semantic search and dynamic tool enablement, which apart from anything else, you can see as well, I got 21 tools now when I had 3 a minute ago. That has a cache cost on the model layer. So it's, anyway, it felt like we're the wrong level in the stack to solve that problem. So we didn't want to do it. This one's a shout out to the URL elicitation. I love the secure URL elicitation feature that was added, and VS Code supports it. So I can show you. So let me just open a new one. So if I start this version of the server and I make sure that that's the one I have only enabled, which it looks like it is. If I say, I don't know, list my personal repositories, I can't spell. It can't because I haven't provided a token, and this is the stand.io server, so it doesn't have OAuth. But what is this? It's eliciting me to go and visit the authorization endpoint of GitHub's authorization server. And when I hit that, I think you're seeing my whole screen, so I can even show you. This is a web page, actually the MCP server itself is hosting, saying, even though I was running it as a binary inside Docker, that I had a port set to be open so it could host a little website to tell you it worked. The flip side of that is that it never failed because it waited until the elicitation callback finished the OAuth flow, and then it succeeded. So there was no failure at all. And how this works is that I am baked in a OAuth app into the standalone version of it, and it just has an ephemeral token. If I restart the server, it'll lose it, and I'll have to click the accept again, because I didn't want to have to also marry up all the secure token storage and everything. But this is a fallback, so if you provide a PAT token, it will still work. Like, the goal here was to try and get more people off PAT tokens, and I was trying to make it really easy. And like you saw, it's fairly slick, like the full OAuth flow, and that supports all the like Pixie and like the advanced OAuth features that are in the MCP specification. So it is as safe a flow as we can make. But unfortunately, client support for secure URL elicitation is lagging massively. And I had an issue open with, I think, 3 different users tried this out on 3 different hosts, and all 3 of them it failed because it does by default, it does the same thing as the cancellation flow. Basically, if your client doesn't support it, it just goes on as if you click cancel. And yeah, there's no point in me doing this for VS Code because our remote server OAuth is seamless. It uses the app that you logged into VS Code with, so it's really like, it doesn't need this feature. So first party for me is unfortunately not really compelling, and I'm just hoping that more clients start supporting this, because I would really, really love to get it into people's hands that are using third-party agents, so they can avoid having plain text PAT tokens in JSON files that agents can read, other applications can read, and I just don't want people to get hacked. And this was kind of like one of the ways I was trying to do it. But yeah. So anyway, that's the last thing I kind of wanted to demo in person. So like I said, way too much JSON, but I hope you can forgive me. Like, from a protocol level, I thought it was kind of interesting to see how we're trying to layer on things like tool selection and standalone OAuth and, token-based kind of tool availability, etc. So hopefully it was interesting.
Absolutely. There's so many people building enterprise-grade MCP servers right now. Thank you for sharing what's been working and what you're experimenting with. Sam, it's been awesome having you here. I'll drop links to the MCP Pulse newsletter interview and GitHub MCP server where people can find you when they want to give feedback. I hope that they're going to experiment.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Rachel Lee. It's been really fun to try and share some of my story. And obviously, we've hung out at our MCP Connect conference in Paris, and that was great fun. So it's always a pleasure.
Let's do it again sometime. Thank you.
I hope so. Bye.
Bye.